To a kid, the world feels very potent. Not that you would even know what that word means at that age, but I mean that you're actively processing things unfamiliar and new. Unique things tend to leave an impact on you, like playing at the playground you and your friends play at, and you notice that one tree that's kind of creepy looking, so it kind of evokes imagination in you. Like if you walk up close enough, maybe he'll speak in a creepy Russian accent and try to sell you potions. So you stay away. Like growing up downtown where there was unique and older architecture unfamiliar to a kid that would usually see suburb house, picket fence, suburb house, picket fence, redneck amusement parks. Downtown felt like an adventure to little suburbia baby me and got my imagination shook. To some people, the world is just the world, but to little me, it was fascinating. And if there's been any piece of art that replicates that feeling, it would be EarthBound. The Mother series, or at least more specifically, the first two are a bit unusual to what was poppin' for RPGs at the time. Mother 1 was a game that came post Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, which, you know, are the two most popular RPG series out there, especially in Japan for Gaming Dairy Queen. These series tended to lean more into fantastical settings of medieval times with their castles and their magic and their sword-wielding heroes, or even different from Sega's 1987 Phantasy Star, which opted for the combination of medieval fantasy and sci-fi, or the sci-fi demonology of Atlus's RPG dungeon crawler Digital Devil story Megami Tensei. Compared to these, Mother was more contemporary in its setting choice. This choice of setting is an interesting choice by Shigesato Itoi, the series creator, because he had a lack of knowledge about medieval times and found a modern setting to be more interesting. In a Famicom Hishohon interview, Itoi says, "People who choose a modern drama are moved by modern human emotion." In other words, in the world of medieval Europe, the hero goes out to fight battles to fulfill his allegiance to his king, and the king warmly embraces his hero. But stuff like that doesn't exist in modern times. So adults are just going to ridicule children who are wandering around outside. They think the kid's a runaway. So to put it differently, in a modern drama, when you start the game, you're immediately in the hole. Medieval stories start at 0 and work their way up. But my game can only start at a negative point somewhere below 0. And whether you can understand that or not is what makes games entirely different. In another interview, he says, "It seems that everyone just bases their ideas off famous works like The Lord of the Rings. So I thought, if I'm going to make something, then a modern story would be far more interesting. A story that takes place in the world we see around us today, with kids of today talking with people of today, having all manner of adventures." Earlier, I had gone to Chicago for a job. I fell in love with the houses and streets I saw there, and I made great use of that experience for Mother. So, from the start, Mother is a slight divergence from RPGs with its choice of setting. And add that to Itoi's sense of humor, and you end up with a series that feels like sort of a fun parody homage to RPGs. Little details like Ness, our hero's main weapon being a bat, works sort of as a modern makeshift sword for a tween, being this allusion to fantasy RPG protagonists wielding swords, like Dragon Quest protagonists, for example. Then there's the character of Brick Road turned Dungeon Man, who I adore because his existence feels like it's poking fun at the concept of quote-unquote dungeons in video games by parroting them a little and having a dude obsessed with making one, but he sucks at it. Then he commits himself to becoming a dungeon. Like, it's brilliant, dry, meta video game humor. Dungeon Man is purposely awful with signs everywhere and insufferable music, which is made hilarious by Brick Road saying it's one of his greatest accomplishments. Brick Road is just one of many colorful characters you come across. But one thing I really noticed off the bat on my replay of this game is how the game delivers a very palpable characterization through little bits that can go unnoticed by the player. Specifically some of the party members, like even more specifically Ness. Ness's mom gives in and says, "You'll sneak out of your room anyways," when he goes to check out the meteor crash, instantly keying in him as a rebellious kid with an insatiable curiosity, which is the second occasion of subtle characterization for Ness. When picking Ness's favorite thing, which is what his signature attack will be named, the don't care or canon option is rockin', or in Japanese kiai, which translates to fighting spirit. This shows a sort of determination and rebelliousness within Ness, which will show up more as he stands up against evil. Then the next example of subtle characterization is this. Oh my god, shut up. Porky's knock is insane. I've never heard a more annoying knock before in my life. Even his knock is an instant source of characterization for Porky. When you're fighting with him, he is absolutely useless as a party member. King, a freaking dog, is more useful than him in a fight, and his little brother is more useful, showing who's the more mature of the two brothers. But the game does a good job of getting us to sympathize with the Peas, as Porky and Piggy's parents are away at an elegant restaurant at the time of the meteorite landing, showing them to be sort of aloof when it comes to parenting. Pokey makes a comment about how his dad comes after him if he doesn't pick up the phone after 3 rings. Entering his house shows this further, as right next to the entrance is a cactus plant, instantly showing how prickly coming into the home is, with this sort of dissonant theme playing. Then Porky's dad beats him, his mom kills her mentor, all that. Yeah, these people suck. One of my favorite OSTs in the game happens to be Paula's theme, because it has this sort of soothing beginning, something almost motherly like, as some of the kids at Polestar describe her as being like to them. Then it evolves into this determined theme, displaying that sort of tiny edge to her that you get a hint of when she talks about how she would have had to burst out of here if you didn't come to rescue her. Like, damn girl. Her prey mechanic is also interesting, keying into an aspect of Paula, like she's the type of person to sort of believe in miracles by hoping, which you wouldn't know because most people don't use her pray ability until the final fight, where you then pray more than a guilty Catholic. Jeff is interesting when taking into account his relationship with his dad. Jeff is living at this boarding school where there's not really anyone around but other kids his age, and his buddy Tony, who is, big in love with Jeff, obviously, which was intentional, as Itoi wanted to depict gayness in his works because he wanted to stress that it's a normal thing. But after a hop and a skip containing a befriending of a monkey that likes bubblegum and traveling across the lake on a sea monster drugged up, you enter into Dr. Endonut's lab, and this place. This lab thing brings a complicated sort of emotions, because there's this warmness to it that comes with seeing your parent again after a long time, and has these beeps and boops that brings some ambience to this domain of technology. But I can't help but feel like there's this melancholy to it that captures the distance in the hearts between Jeff and his father, which is all too obvious from the way he talks to Jeff, like he can't really navigate a conversation with his son because he is too unfamiliar with him. I think this and the depiction of Ness's dad, and even Flint sort of from Mother 3, come from Shigesato Itoi's experiences with his own father. Itoi's father was a legal agent who was very busy and very distant. In fact, he was only really raised by his grandmother. I love the way he captured this sort of complicated abandonment that's not the usual "I'm going to the store to pick up some milk" with a suitcase in hand. Then there is Pooh, who is young but has been in perpetual training and can't play with others his age, like the little girl NPC who begs him to play with her once again. This, along with the final trial of his new training, where he literally gets tortured by the spirit of his ancestor. This makes me feel that Pooh is in fact a kid that might have been forced to grow up a little too early, constantly training for a task bigger than him, like the one section of the game where he fucks off and learns PK Starstorm. I've already brought up a couple of times how effectively EarthBound uses its soundtrack to tell the story to evoke a specific mood or ambience. There are multiple times in the game where EarthBound's OST samples tracks from popular songs, which to me feels akin to a kid trying to come up with my own soundtrack to my life. And when you're a kid, what else are you gonna do but use songs you hear on the radio as reference? This kind of extends to how music is used as a storytelling device in EarthBound, because this can easily extend to the character's impression of the world around him. Like, I need a theme song for hippie battle music, so I'm gonna use Johnny B. Good. It makes sense that a lot of the OST in this game would sample or reference popular Western music, most notably the Beatles, when thinking about it from this angle, but also in how it effectively immerses the player in that American Western vibe Itoi was trying to catch. Then there's how the music works to make a setting leave the intended impression, like how grand and adventurous Forsyth's theme would be to a kid just entering a huge city for the first time, or how Winter's evokes this cozy warmth away from the cold winds of winter inside, along with the warm colors of Winter's boarding school. For me, Month of 3 is the greatest example of OST being used as a storytelling device in a video game, but EarthBound is most certainly the groundwork for that. To make an evocative adventure game, you need a world full of personality to make it work, which EarthBound does with the utmost oomph by each town's aesthetic and eccentric NPCs that color the world. Annette is described as the wildflower of Eagleland with strong boys. It's a colorful, beautiful town, but with tough kids like Ness being a little rebellious and the unruly and disruptive sharks that even the politicians of the city have trouble dealing with. Tucson feels more embracing of nature with autumn colors and the bursting Berglund Park, with the theme song Boy Meets Girl playing, capturing yet another aspect of youth in this sort of nostalgic autumn town becoming close to someone with potential romantic interest at a young age. Perfect setting for the adorable implied love interest pairing of Ness and Paula. It also effectively expands the world by introducing reoccurring characters in Apple Kid and Everdread, while also using Berglund Park to add this more flavorful feeling to the town. Then 3 starts this trend of encroaching darkness as you progress further in the game. It's interesting because if you think of a kid's first fear, it would have probably been from like watching a zombie movie when you may have been a bit too young to watch one. So it makes sense that the first uncanny thing Ness runs into is zombies. But at the same time, after you remove the Curse of Threed, it continues that sort of autumn theme established from Tucson, with even a tree having fully lost its leaves. It makes me feel like there's a pattern here of early EarthBound towns, specifically starting with these really popping summer colors of Annette, only to wind down with each respective town closer and closer until you get to Forsyth. One of EarthBound's strongest aspects is integrating social aspects with these memorable caricature-esque NPCs when you talk to and or fight them. You often meet political leaders who are incompetent, like Annette's mayor. And on it, you have a good old-fashioned ghetto showdown with Annette's police force for something like trespassing. It's completely ridiculous, but at the same time, Itoi himself has had problems with the police in the past, getting arrested on multiple occasions when protesting. And not to mention Japan's police force has a history of being very naughty boys. In Happy Happy Village, you fight against a cult that comedically chants and celebrates blue. These guys seem to be at worst annoying since spreading blue is kinda outlandish, but there are these subtle undertones of them being bad, like them trying to pry money from you and kidnapping. If you are even knee deep in the EarthBound iceberg, you are probably aware of the censorship of these cultists from the Japanese version to make them look less KKK, because, you know, fuck those guys. There isn't any direct reference to Toy saying happyism is inspired by the KKK, so this is just an interpretation, but it would make sense for some of it to be a satire of the KKK. The way they obsess over the color blue is almost this comedic framing used to highlight the absurdity of worshipping and feeling superior over being aligned with something like a color, but probably more relevantly as the cult being inspired by Shinriko, a cult so notorious in Japan it is an inspiration for a plethora of media, like their 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack being the basis for the plot of Mawaru Penguin Drum, and generally inspiring fictional cults and Berserk and 20th Century Boys. In fact, the color blue is incredibly tied to this cult, with their flag color being predominantly blue and otherwise, so I think this interpretation makes sense. Now, EarthBound predates their violent attacks and instead pokes fun at their general weird behavior, but also the harmful things like extorting money or very deceptive quote-unquote recruiting that tended to be more like kidnapping. Cults also tend to prey on lonely, lost individuals, so it's very telling that Porky ends up joining the happiest cult, saying that he's happy to have joined, and this ends up being the starting point to his corruption. Foresight is one of the more loaded parts of the game, intertwining the excitement of a small town kid entering and traversing a sprawling metropolis for the first time, along with observing social issues through a peculiar humorous lens, along with depicting an incomprehensible darkness of humanity in the eyes of an adolescent. Having a chat with some of NPCs reveals that Monotoli, the big mega corporation owner, is inside the pockets of lawyers and police and has used this influence to steal his land like candy from a particularly helpless infant. Foresight shows that these sorts of metropolises tend to be the congregating point for corruption and exploitation, a place people go to make it big and get corrupted by capitalism or destroyed by it. Like the Runaway Five, again. Moonside exemplifies all of this, viewing Foresight from a dimension that I think is an allegory for city nightlife, which is created by the Mani Mani statue. Mani Mani is this gilded thing that tends to corrupt people, and a consistent motif for the dark side in this game. Knowing what I know about Itoi from Mother 3, this feels like a deliberate thing about how wealth corrupts people. And from this moment of leaving Foresight, EarthBound expands out of its urban environments, resulting in the world feeling even grander, but foreign and confusing. But when you arrive in Summers, it reminds me of something about my youth that makes this part of this approach click with me. When I was a kid, I lived in a beach city. Not really a huge, grandiose one, but it's pretty nice. I remember going to restaurants on the waterfront, and there would be paintings to fit the atmosphere of a restaurant by the water, and they would depict these resort towns that were foreign but imagination evoking to me as a kid. And that's sort of what Summers feels like to me. Like I jumped into the painting like I would in my imagination as a kid. Same thing for the rest of these non-equal land locations in the game. Some of these locations like Dalam or Scaraba feel like heavily filtered versions of places in the real world. Or even dinosaurs popping out of frickin' nowhere is like a kid reading about dinosaurs and having that persistent hope and wonder that they might still be around. There's all of, that, and they also do the job of feeling distinct and making the player feel like they're far from home. A lot of EarthBound feels like the manifestation of a child's imagination into a world. The enemies you fight are things that can go from an imaginative version of pretty mundane things to things a child would glimpse from a textbook, movie, comic, or TV show, like cavemen or even the zombies of Threed. A lot of things are caricatured. Adults are either stupid or malevolent, doing things that seem out there through a child's eyes, like the creepiness of a cult, or just the NPCs being these exaggerated caricatures of an everyday person who sometimes seem lame to a rebellious kid that wants to be a hero and fight against the evil of this world. Master Belch and his minions are like a makeshift of what a gross evil thing would be to a child. So it makes sense the evil of this world evolves from this almost juvenile sort of personification of vomit monsters and zombies, to stuff that's more abstract or less understandable. As a child experiences more of the darkness of the world, it becomes more existential, but the game reminds you never to lose your sense of humor, which is what EarthBound does. I feel like EarthBound is a sort of coming-of-age story in the way you sort of discover more of the world, its social issues, and the darkness in the world as you progress further. But at the same time, it is as much a celebration of the virtues of youth that shouldn't be lost, like imagination, a sense of humor, and the boldness of being young. The adults of this world are so far gone into complacency that sometimes they aren't even aware of the absurdity they are in, which can be true for real life sometimes. That's where this sort of bold and rebellious spirit of the protagonist feels satisfying, these kids shutting down these oppressive systems within the game. Itoi himself is no stranger to rebellion, as during his student days at Hosei University, he participated in many student activist movements, protesting political and cultural issues of Japan at the time, which he did so much that he was arrested 5 times. But there's also a fascinating dichotomy in that there's this underlying delicacy and melancholy in the approach to EarthBound that makes it almost feel spiritual at times. Some of my favorite bits of the game are the sanctuary locations. A lot of the sanctuary location memories are these tiny but formative fragments of memory for Ness, like a whiff of his favorite food, his childhood dog when he was just a puppy, him as a baby wearing that red cap that is so essential to his identity, his mother wishing him to be a thoughtful, strong boy, him seeing his mother when she was younger. I remember once watching a clip of a streamer playing through EarthBound on his stream as he is holding his newborn baby in his arms. He has gotten to a sanctuary location and is taking in the moment when the screen flashes on the text. Ness saw a vision of his father holding him. And there's something about that scene that clearly strikes the streamer deeply, but he is unable to put what he's feeling into words. He just sort of says, "Would you look at that?" and embraces his child and kisses him on the head. That sort of abstract, indescribable, ethereal, but still understood sentimentality is what really strikes me about EarthBound, besides its zany idiosyncrasies. Related to that, Lumine Hall has this great moment I love. There's this cool looking room with the wall lights flickering and shit. Then in the midst of it, Ness starts to see his own thoughts reflecting on the wall, and they're not self-confident thoughts of a rebellious, courageous boy we know. They are confused, anxious thoughts about the future and the very confusing present. It makes me remember Buzz's parting words to Ness. "Do not be anxious about the future," which was surely a line that seeded this inner conflict for Ness that encapsulates the anxiety of growing up. And all of this sets up for one of my favorite sections in the game, Magicant. It is literally a projection of Ness's mind, right for any sort of characterization you can get for the kid. In the Japanese version of the game, Ness is nude in that section because being in your birthday suit typically happens to be a sign of purity, conveying that Magic Ant is this vulnerable place for Ness where he is bearing everything to the world. Mentally, we see vulnerable characteristics of Ness, like his mom saying he can stay there forever. He can always be a kid that can come home to his mom, which very neatly integrates with this homesick mechanic that forms a very crucial characteristic for Ness. The black and white flashback to Ness as a baby is beautiful and sentimental, once again capturing that sentimental, ethereal contemplation of youth and growing up. You get an NPC that is a younger version of Ness who wants to play with his older self, but older Ness is busy. He has changed and his priorities are different from when he was even younger. So how different will he be when he is even older? Porky and Magic Ant says he has no luck and wants to be friends with Ness forever. It shows that Ness actually sympathizes with Porky, acknowledging and being aware of the poor circumstances that led him to be how he is, and wanting to be friends with him despite it, and acknowledging their reasons behind the darkness of Porky. Magic Ant to the Sea of Eden has this almost fragile, existential atmosphere to it, like Ness is hearing the echoes of his life vibrate in this large plane, getting reminded of little details that were important to him growing up. With each of the sanctuary locations, Ness always gets a glimpse at something distant in the past related to him, like a formative memory or something small yet potent in that way. It's like how memories are never memories, they are memories of memories. A faint echo getting farther away from its source as you get older. It's extremely powerful that Ness's nightmare is the Mani Mani statue, this thing that has been deeply tied to the corruption of adults, like the creation of a cult or Moonside. Ness fights against that part of him, the future that he has been so anxious about, the encroaching reality of adulthood, and the darkness that comes with it. The acknowledgement that darkness is inside him as well, and that cynicism could infect him as he gets even older. A lot of the evil in the world of EarthBound is displayed as these fucked up monsters because to the understanding of people who don't empathize, hell, they might as well be a goopy little monster. When the one fucked up alien goes all Amber Alert Impala, this is definitely what a kid would comprehend a child abductor at. When you think of someone who does messed up things, you don't think of good old Carlson from across the street, you think of something darker. But the truth is that this is what humans are capable of, and we see hints of it, but not enough of it to confront it really. I even see adults dehumanize people who do terrible things almost as a form of escapism in order to evade the fact that we all have this capability inside of us, which EarthBound acknowledges in Ness's subconscious, with the Mani Mani statue being the symbol of Ness's dark side. A statue unearthed by a dude literally named Liar Exaggerate and passed around, corrupting many characters in the game like Mr. Carpenter in Monotoli. So Ness has to fight against this idea of it this time to persist against that corruption. Ness is able to succeed against Mani Mani and absorbs the land of Magic Ant into his heart, while reflecting on the sanctuary locations related to memories of his past. Essentially an allegory for him absorbing the essence of his childhood, the things that have made him who he is, and become stronger and more resolved than ever. Absolutely beautiful storytelling. One of the most highly talked about meta aspects of EarthBound is the situation around the Gygas final fight, like what the imagery around the fight is supposed to be, and also the dialogue, which is widely known to have come from Itoi's having a little trauma incident where as a kid he walked into the wrong theater and witnessed a scene that he misinterpreted as sexual assault. This misinterpretation comes from a feeling of shock and fear of a young boy witnessing a dark, unfamiliar, and unexpected experience. So Itoi channels the more abstract feelings of this experience into the important boss fight against Gygas, the thing that is an allegory for all of the evil in the world, a being that thrives off of negative and selfish people to push his own gains. Itoi himself says there was this sense of terror having atrocity and eroticism side by side, and that's what Gygas's lines are at the end. The presentation of Gygas's final fight isn't supposed to be literal, but it is supposed to represent this incomprehensible darkness that strikes fear into the more innocent, a manifestation of evil and deriving pleasure from pain. Two feelings that do not coincide together in the eyes of a pure child. This is essentially the antithesis of the characters and the game's sentiments. The effect this has on Porky is extreme and the most potent of Gygas's negative influence. Porky ends up being the foil to Ness, a kid who from the beginning had no sense of courage when compared to another kid his age, a dog, his little brother, in a space-time continuum breaking fly, and perpetually gets sucked up more into Gygas's influence, as he has imparted way too much power for an abused kid. When you see Porky in the final fight, he is so fucked up looking and so far gone, and is the only character that Ness can't reach. He doesn't have that rebellious spirit going with the flow by riding the coattails of the powerful, and when it all falls apart, he runs away. He is so pathetic, but so well written, and represents corruption so well from its roots of feeling neglected and inheriting the worst possible traits from his parents, while being able to easily be manipulated by others because of this. So, what do you do to fight against Gygas? You reach out to the people you've helped and or connected with so they can pray for you, showing that the positivity you have spread overshadows the negativity that Gygas has spread. Also getting help from the people Ness and others that have had an effect on him. The result of all of his experiences that have helped him to mature, as he has seen all of the good and otherwise in the world that he has already accepted exists in all of us. Reaching out to the people who are bound to this zany earth, the one we can't help but love despite its faults. It's hard not to fall in love with the absurd humor of this world, all the colorful characters and their memorable lines. The shy Tendos, the Mr. Saturns, the Bones guy, Thomas Jefferson, the guy stuck at the end of the world's largest traffic jam. They all complement this wonderful creative world of EarthBound. Anyone that knows my taste knows that I like games with very imaginative, creative, immersive, atmospheric settings. I think one reason I'm so fascinated with adventure games is it replicates that same feeling I had seeing the world through fresh eyes as a kid. To me, going out to a different place than what I was used to and seeing architecture I'm not overly familiar with would always fascinate me, and still does. Playing EarthBound is like going back to the roots of that, taking me back to this innocent period of my life when I could really appreciate the beauty of life and things that are seemingly mundane compared to fantasy worlds. But the contemporary setting makes me appreciate the beauty we have in this world, faults and all. Mr. Saturns are the most distinct, unique creature of the Mother series, and to Itoi they are signs of innocence. I think it says a lot about how the most lovable, harmless, and memorable symbol of Mother is one that represents innocence. A series that supports the beauty of innocence of its simplicity, made up of courage, a sense of humor, and imagination, are all virtues and things that shouldn't be lost. I love works that have the idiosyncrasies of their creator embedded into them, and Mother is probably the example of this. One thing that stands out to me in researching Itoi is his frankness and interviews. He has this way of saying things that he probably shouldn't say with a sense of humor. When talking about the re-release of EarthBound on the Wii U Virtual Console, the interviewer is all like, oh my gosh, Itoi-san is going to make a special appearance on the Miiverse social network. And Itoi pretty much goes, I'm not even sure what that is, but that's nice to hear. This is a man who has admitted to naming his character in Dragon Quest, what is essentially wee-wee. He is a man that really hasn't lost much of that childish sense of humor, and it really shows in his work with this blend of wisdom and this unusual cocktail of storytelling. In a discussion about Mother 2 being released on the Wii U Virtual Console, Iwata, a man largely responsible for EarthBound being released at all, has said that if you think about why Mother games are special, I think it's because of Itoi-san's presence. There's no one else like Itoi-san among game makers, so there are no other games like Mother. From an overall format point of view, Mother falls in the same category as other RPGs, and in that regard, I don't think it is that special. However, generally speaking, it is regarded as a unique game that no others compare to. I think that is because Itoi-san is permeated throughout the game. Whether it's something interesting, something there's just too much of, something beyond what you would normally expect, or even something completely absurd, I think all of those different gameplay elements are influenced by him. On the back of the package for Mother 2 when it came out, it said, "Children will become adults and adults will become children the more time passes." I agree with that. This quote is so very apt for EarthBound. When I experienced the game when I was older, it was sort of like I was peering through something with this sentimental lens I wasn't used to, something I do more and more as I get older. And coming back to EarthBound when I'm older makes me appreciate the more adolescent identity of the game. Sure, I obviously appreciate its more mature subject matter as I get older, but that's what makes a celebration of youth and the things that come with it all the more powerful. I think as I am older, I need a reminder every now and then to hold on to my sense of humor, creativity, and try not to lose to the darkness of adulthood. And upon writing this video, it clicked for me why EarthBound is possibly one of the more prevalent sources of influence for lots of popular games today, like with individual developers like Undertale and Omori. This is a game that inspires imagination and tells you to hold on to that, a sandbox of ideas that inspires interpretation and imagination. Both of those examples, I said, use the humor that EarthBound imparts and tell you not to lose. It's even hard to not see inspiration in fellow Nintendo franchises like Pokemon's feeling of wide-eyed adolescent adventure while using NPCs and environment to tell a story, or Paper Mario's sense of humor that sometimes pokes fun at RPG design norms. These are all speculation, by the way. There's no official source, not that I could. These games usually have a common through line of being absurd and funny, but with a darker layer underneath, but a consistent feeling of childlike wonder, creativity, and imagination that helps you persist. I can't help but feel like Itoi has imparted some of that childlike wonder to us in the way he inspires us to create works that have some sort of aesthetics as Mother, but are so unique in our own ways. There's something beautiful in the way that despite this murkiness of adulthood, it's still okay to just create.